Our scripture reading today comes from Genesis 39, verses 6 through 9. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hands, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. And she said, Lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?
It's good to see everybody back again for our 1 o'clock service. I want to remind you we're in a 4-part series that we started last week on decision making. We said that our lives are really, when you boil it down, just a series of decisions, one after another, and we want to make the kinds of decisions that we're going to be proud of, that we want to look back on, we won't be ashamed of. And sometimes we're just not prepared for those decisions. We get those real difficult decisions, and that's really more of what we're talking towards when we're hit with a decision and we really don't want to make that decision. It's not a decision we ever thought we'd have to make, but now here it is. And sometimes the time is short. We wish we had more time to evaluate the options. We wish we had more information. We wish we could see into the future and see, well, how is this going to pan out if I make this decision or if I make that decision? And we wish we had more to go on, but a decision has to be made. And there are times when we really just don't want to make these decisions. And we wish we had more guidance, somebody to tell us what to do, somebody to give us a path to walk down. And so I'm putting these 4 questions before us last week, this week, and the next 2 weeks. It's not going to be future telling. We're never going to have everything that we wish that we had. But we can live with fewer regrets. We can live with decisions that we are proud that we made. And so we've been talking about these 4 questions. Again, there's these decisions that we just wish we didn't have to make. Maybe it's your job. Maybe you like your job. Maybe you like your house. You like your church family. You like your kids' school. But then all of a sudden you get this call and there's an opportunity to move a few hundred miles away and you got a decision to make. Or maybe you don't have a decision to make, really. Maybe your division is relocating and something's going to have to give one way or the other. But you do have decisions to make and you need some guidance on that. Maybe you're in a relationship and you think this is a good relationship. You think maybe this is the one, maybe I could stick with this one, and then all of a sudden your best friend comes to you and you're not going to like this, but you need to know this about him or about her. And now you've got a decision to make. We have those decisions that are difficult, and a decision has to be made. We talked about how they're often defining points in who we become. You listen to somebody tell their story and tell about the decisions in their past, and you come to find, wow, those decisions, some of those decisions became monumental. You are where you are today. You are who you are today because of that in your past. But at that point in time, I can tell you didn't know. You could not have told at that point in time that one little decision was going to be such a turning point. And yet, that's the way our decisions become. And so we want to make good decisions. And they're here and they're gone, and it comes so quickly. We need a little bit of guidance in the decision-making moment. And so we're talking about these 4 questions. Question number 1 we talked about last week, am I being honest with myself? Am I being honest with myself? Why am I doing this really? What's the real reason that I'm inclined to either go in this direction or that direction? Because we talked about the fact that the heart can deceive us. It will always carry that potential. We will always be able to sell ourselves on bad decisions. And we look back later and we think, how did I make that decision? Why did I not see that at that point in time? It's because our heart carries the potential to deceive. Our emotions, when we talk about our heart can deceive us, it's our emotions, our passions, the thing that we get tied into in the moment, and it becomes everything, but it's not everything, but it can deceive us. And so am I being honest with myself? What's the real reason? Today, question number 2. Question number 2, what story do I want to tell? What story do I want to tell? What do I want to say that I did? What do I want to, when I'm looking back on this, and this is in the future, and I'm looking back on the now, what story do I want to tell? It's amazing how condensed our lives become as they move from the present tense to the past tense. Have you ever thought about that? It's amazing how condensed our lives become as they move from the present to the past. High school was 4 years of drama, of breakups and relationships, of cramming, of trying to plan for the future. What am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to live? All kinds of, it was huge. Sports activities or extracurricular, that's a big word. Give me a second on that one. Extracurricular activity, all kinds of stuff. And it was huge. 4 years worth. But now, somebody asks you, well, tell me about high school. I'll give you 2 or 3 sentences. I went here, I did this or that, I made good grades or bad grades or okay grades. I keep up with maybe 1, maybe 2 of those people that I remember from back then. And it's just 2 or 3 sentences of a story. It was huge. It was 4 years. It was everything when I was in it, and now it's a story that I tell. College, 4 more years, 5 more years, however long it took to get through that. And when you were in it again, I thought that was a big time. I mean, again, we're adding the same things that go on in high school, but maybe a little bit more so. Now I'm thinking about getting married. Maybe I am married, and now I'm thinking about having children while I'm in college. And there's all kinds of things that are going on, but you condense it, and it's a story that you tell. The day that you got married, the year that you got married, those first years in your first home, the days you were having kids, your kids' first year, condense. It's all just these stories that you tell now. And it's amazing how condensed our lives get when they move from the present tense to the past tense. And what I'm getting at is this, that no matter how big, no matter how complicated the decision is when you're in it, there will be a day when it's nothing more than a story that you tell. When you're in it, it's huge. It's everything. Boy, everything. My whole life hangs on this one decision. And it's all you can think about, and you stay up at night. And it's big, but then it gets into the past, and all of a sudden it's so small. And it's a part, it's a sentence, it's a phrase in the story that you tell. What do I want to say that it did? What's the story that I want to tell about me? Because right now you get to decide what story you're going to tell. You have no control over the story that's already been told. I wish I could go back and change the past. I wish I could go and rearrange some of the facts. The story that I have to tell right now because it's true of me, and I could either lie or I could really tell my story. You can't change that. But right now, you get to decide about the story that you tell about today. You're writing it right now. What story do you want to tell? And what is so great about this question is that it pulls us through to the other side. It pulls us through to a place where it is safe to be honest with myself, back to last week. It pulls me through to a safe place where my fears no longer have that pull on me that they do now, where my laziness no longer has the pull on me that it does now, where my temptations no longer have the hold on me that they do right now. I can honestly say, and I think you could probably too, I'm not afraid of any difficult decision that's in my past. I'm not afraid of it anymore. In the moment, I might have been terrified of it. And I might have been terrified about what I was going to have to do in that decision. But pick any decision in my past, even how dark and ugly it was, I'm not afraid of it today. It has no fear hold on me. Any temptations, the temptations are apt to rise at any time. I'm apt to pull on a new one at any time. But any temptation that had me in the past, it has no pull on me now. That was yesterday's temptation. That was 10 years ago's temptations. And so when I ask this question, what story do I want to tell, and I put myself beyond it, and I put myself in the future, it pulls me through to a place where I can make a decision with clarity, and where these things that cloud my decisions today have no hold on me tomorrow. Because the thing is, you want to be able to tell your story. You want to be able to tell your whole story. You want to not have to skip any parts. You want to not have to lie about who you are. There's going to come a day when you're staring your adult children in the face and you're telling them where they came from, and you're telling them who you want to be able to tell them your whole story. There's going to be a day when you are looking your future wife, future husband in the face, and you're telling them, this is who you don't want to have to lie. You want to be able to tell your whole story. You don't want to have to skip any parts. So ask today, what story do I want to tell? Because my story eventually becomes part of somebody else's story. When your children tell their story, where did you come from? Where do they start? They start with your story. When you get married, your spouse's story now becomes part of your story. Your story becomes part of your spouse's story. It's not just all about you. It's not just all about today. Our stories have reach, and so it's a very important question to ask today when I'm in the decision-making moment, what story do I want to tell? Let's go to Genesis chapter 39. I want us to look where this is demonstrated very powerfully in the Scripture. It's a story that you are very, very familiar with. It's a story that spans several different chapters in the book of Genesis. We're going to Genesis chapter 39. And it's the account of Joseph. We could talk about David. It's the account of Joseph. We're going to talk about Joseph today. Just to kind of catch us up, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 39, but to catch us up to this point, and you know the story, but let's go through it anyway. You might have grown up with sibling rivalry, but I doubt it was anything like this, because the conversation goes something like this. Do we kill him, or do we just sell him? Do we kill him or do we sell him? We really want to kill him, but maybe we could just be merciful and sell him. And here Joseph comes, and you know what happens. They strip him of his cloak. They throw him in a pit. We'll just decide tonight. And when night comes, they make the decision. We'll sell him to these slave traders, and so they do. And Joseph goes off into slavery, and they manufacture some lie to tell his father as he's left behind. He was killed by some wild animal. But Joseph comes down into Egypt. He's put up on the auction block. He is purchased by Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard, a very influential man. And he finds himself in a situation and making decisions that he never thought he'd have to make. He never thought he'd have to be away from his family, away from God's people, with these pagans who do not speak his language, who do not worship his God. And now he has a decision to make. And Joseph does something that's very fascinating. He decides he's not going to play the victim card. That whatever has been dealt to him, this is in God's will, and he's going to do the best that he can do. He's going to take his responsibilities as a slave seriously. He is going to work with work ethic, and he is going to worship his God even still. And so he does the best that he can do. And he grows. And his responsibilities grow. And as he climbs the ladder there, you know how eventually he finds himself at the top of Potiphar's household. Potiphar said, I don't worry about anything. It's all in Joseph's hand. And now he's got a pretty good situation. Yeah, he's still a slave. He can't go home. But you know what? He's not chained down in the bottom of a boat out on the Nile. He's not laying bricks. He's got things pretty well. It's about as good as you could hope for. And then all of a sudden, we have another bombshell here in Genesis chapter 39. Now, just as a side note, this is so how the devil does this all the time. You can think back on times where the devil was after you, and you fought, and you fought, and you fought, and you fought, and you fled, like James says, flee the devil, and he will flee from you. Resist the devil, he will flee from you. You did that, and you finally came through on the other side, and you prevailed, and it was so good. And it was so hard, but it was so good, and you can finally exhale, and you can finally relax for a moment, and things go back to normal, and things go back to good, and you come to expect the goodness. And then all of a sudden, maybe a week down the road, maybe a month down the road, maybe a couple of years down the road, all of a sudden, Satan comes back. And it's just like you would think you might expect it. You would think, well, now I've been through this. But for some reason, and I've been there, and you don't understand why, but for some reason, it just catches you completely by surprise. What's going on? What's going on? And he's got you all over again, and you're going through it all over again. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 12. I love what Peter says about this. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. Peter says, what? You didn't know Satan was going to be after you? You did not know that Satan was after Christians? You didn't know that Satan would come back after he fled? That's what he did to Jesus. Jesus resisted the devil in the wilderness. He read him scripture and he fled away, but he came back. You didn't know that Satan operates that way? And so Joseph, he's been through the gauntlet, and he's fought Satan back, and he's made a name for himself in Potiphar's household. He's done well, but now he's back. Now Satan's back again, and he's faced with another terrible decision that he thought he'd never have to make. Genesis chapter 39, verse 6. So he left, I'm talking about Potiphar. He left all that he had in Joseph's charge. And because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, which just seems to be foreshadowing something. You know, why else do you say Joseph is handsome in form and appearance? Verse 7, after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused. Now, just to put this in proper context, we don't know what she looked like. We know... We've been conditioned by Hollywood. We think, oh, it must have been some huge temptation. She was extremely beautiful. Maybe she was. Maybe she wasn't. We don't know how old she was. We know Joseph was about 18, 19, 20 years old or so. The boss's wife comes and says, "Sleep with me." And we know that. And Joseph, he has a no-win situation. I mean, any way he goes, he loses. Say he does. Say he does sleep with her. What's going to happen with that? Well, she's eventually going to get tired of him. She's eventually going to have another fling. She's eventually going to get a conscience and go back to her husband. She's eventually going to cast him off some way, and he's doomed. If he doesn't, well, now he's put her to shame. Now he's angered her, and she has the power to also take care of him and make matters very bad for him. He's doomed any way he goes. He's in the kind of decision that you just don't want to have to make. But in that decision-making situation, in that moment, he asked this question: what story do I want to tell? That's not in the scripture, but that's what he does. He rehearses his story out loud to her, is what he does. Look at verse 8 and 9. But he refused, and he said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge." She knows this. He's just rehearsing out loud. "Here's what you need to know about my story, ma'am. He is not greater in the house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me," I love this, "except you, because you are his wife." You have a story too, ma'am. You are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Ma'am, listen to my story. I came here as a slave. Your husband rescued me kind of, sort of, up on the auction block, and he's trusted me. He has taken care of me. He has promoted me, and he has put every single thing in my hands, everything in this house, except for you, because you are his wife. You have a story too. How could I do this thing that you're asking me to do? In light of the story that I've been telling so far, why would I want to add this chapter to it? In light of who I am so far, why would I want to change that? Why would I want to tell this story in light of the fact that your husband has been so good to me, in light of the fact that God has watched over me, in light of the fact not that good things have happened to me, but terrible things have happened to me, and God has been faithful through it all. In light of all that, why would I want to add this to my story? It's not consistent with the story I've been telling. It's not consistent with the story that I want to tell. It's not who I want to be. And so Joseph says, "I cannot sleep with you." Verse 10, and as she spoke to Joseph day after day, I don't think she just spoke to him either, do you? After she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her or to be with her, because he had one or two stories he was going to tell. God blessed me. Potiphar trusted me. And so his wife came up to me and she made herself available to me, so I had an affair with her. Is that the story you want to tell? No. Is that consistent with who you are and who you want to be? No. Or God took care of me. Potiphar entrusted me. God gave me more and more responsibilities, and I grew and I grew. And Potiphar's wife, she came to me and she made herself available to me, but I did not want to add that to who I am. I did not think that was consistent with who I was. And so I refused. Even knowing that it was going to cost me, I refused. That's a story that you could tell. Either way, Joseph is doomed in a worldly sense. Either way, his decision becomes a part of the story that he tells. Well, little does Joseph know he's going to get to tell this story several more times, because Potiphar's wife does exactly what we might fear that she would do. She frames him. She acts as though that he tried to rape her. This Hebrew that you brought in came to make sport of me, came to take advantage of me, and so he is thrown in the dungeon. And there in the dungeon, he has the opportunity to tell his story all over again. He meets two guys that used to work in Pharaoh's house. Hey, this is who I am. This is where I've been. If any of you, not you, Baker, if you, cupbearer, can do anything for me, I would appreciate it. And so 2 years go by. 2 whole years go by, and Pharaoh has a dream. And nobody can interpret it. And the cupbearer said, "Oh, I can't believe I forgot about this. But there was this guy. There was this guy that I met in prison. He could tell dreams." And Pharaoh says, "Go get Joseph. And so they clean him up and they shave him up and they bring him in before Pharaoh. And again, Joseph can tell his whole story. And Pharaoh sees in Joseph a fascinating young Hebrew, a man with great discernment. And you know by the end of the story that Joseph becomes the prime minister of the nation of Egypt. God uses Joseph to save an entire nation from famine. God uses Joseph to save Joseph's family from famine. And because even though Joseph had a no-win situation, Joseph decided that he would do what was consistent with his story that he'd been telling all along and the story that he wanted to tell. Now, the other thing that's very interesting about the story, because it's so multifaceted, is Joseph's brothers, they also had a story to tell. Their story went something like this. We had a brother. We hated him. We were so jealous of him, and one day our jealousy got the best of us, and we decided we wouldn't kill him. We would sell him. And we came up with this lie, and we told our father this lie, and in the moment, we were getting away with it. We sold it. We were getting what we wanted because our father, he bought it hook, line, and sinker. But you know what? In that moment, what we did, we broke our father's heart. And then we had to live with that lie for 15 years. Can you imagine that pain? Can you imagine that pain? Year after year after year, you lied. Congratulations. You got away with it. Congratulations. Now live with it for 15 years. Year after year, our father's heart is broken. Year after year, it's Joseph's birthday and there's an empty seat, and we got to live with it. Side note, never opt for anything that makes you a liar for life. Never opt for anything that makes you a liar for life. Because it might seem in the moment, the profit looks good or the pleasure looks good, but if you go through with it, there will always be something in your past that you'll be tempted to lie about. There will be always something in your past that you can't tell others about. There will be always something in your past that will make you a liar until you finally come clean of it. Never opt for anything that makes you a liar for life. Joseph's brother lived this life for 15 years. We broke our father's heart, and we had to live with it for 15 years. That's a story you could tell. But the story goes further because the famine affects his brothers, the famine affects his family, and so they go down to Egypt to buy grain. And Joseph recognizes them, and now he has another decision to make. What do I do with my conniving, lying, father heart-breaking brothers? Now that I'm in power, I'm large, I'm in charge, and I can do whatever I want. I can get my revenge and maybe break my father's heart further. That's a story you could tell. Or, now that I'm large and I'm in charge, I can do anything that I want to do, but I could show them the love and the mercy that they don't deserve, just like God showed me when I was in that pit, just like God showed me when I was in that dungeon, just like God showed me when I was finding favor in Pharaoh's eyes. That's a story that you could tell. What story do I want to tell? Either way, his decision becomes part of his story. So let me ask you, what's your story so far? What story do you want to tell? This is bigger than an event. This is much bigger than an event. You are building a life that is bigger than the right now. You are building a family that is bigger than your life. You are working in a kingdom that is bigger than this world. When you make a decision, you have to pull it out and see it in perspective. Look at it in the light of where it stands in the story that you are telling, the story that you want to tell. And I want to just point something out. This question has amazing capacity to it, amazing power. It handles the big ones. It handles the big issues. A man loses his job, pushed out of the industry wrongfully, to the point that he no longer has a good name, and he can't go back, and his name is damaged, but the kids have to eat. And men have taken their lives over issues such as that. But no matter how big the job is, no matter how bad it gets, how hard it is to pick things up and make ends meet again, one day it's a sentence in your story. One day it becomes a sentence in your story. One day you'll have work again. One day those kids will be adults, and they'll be putting grandchildren on your knee. One day your heart will heal. What story do you want to tell? The spouse leaves. The spouse dies. A child dies. The big ones, the big issues in life, and you look at them and you would think that if that ever happened to me, I would just stop living. Life would stop going on, but the cruel joke is that it doesn't. The cruel joke is that you have to keep drawing air. and you keep putting your pants on like everybody else does, and you keep having to make a living like everybody else does, and maybe you wish that life would stop, but life doesn't stop. But one day, once you've come through the dark valley, it actually becomes the past, and you want to be able to say, I told the story. I can tell the story that I want to tell about it. I put this down to tell. When Whit was kicked by that horse, so many of you know it. When Whit was kicked by that horse, I lost my mind for a minute. Picked him up and just started walking. Didn't know where. I was just walking. Somebody hollered, "Get in the house," and so I walked to the house. That's the only reason I did. I didn't know. I was just walking. It was the worst day of my life. I was awake 38 hours with him until we finally got in bed, in his bed at home. The scariest ever been. I'll tell you though, one of the things in my life that I have the most peace about is that before we left to chase that ambulance, we told my uncle who owns that horse, we love you, we don't hold anything against you. What story do you want to tell? It's huge when you're in it. It's everything when you're in it. But one day it's a sentence in your story. And what do you want to say that you did? What story do you want to tell? Right now, you are writing your story. Write it and tell it well. If you're here this afternoon and you're not a Christian, I want today to be the favorite day in your story. I want you to look back on today and say, that's the day I started living. That's the day we talked about God's Holy Spirit this morning. We talked about being cleansed and being able to dwell with Him and have life again. That is the day that I found life again. That is the day I became a Christian. If that's your need, what story do you want to tell about today? What story do you want to tell? If you are a Christian but you've wandered today, I pray you look back on today, and that's the day I finally found peace in my life again. Up until that day, I felt like a hypocrite. I probably was a hypocrite. Up until that day, I was living as one thing, but I wasn't that really. But that's the day. That's the day I made it right. That's the day I told sin, you have no place in my life any longer, and I found peace again. If you're here this afternoon, and there's any reason to come, anything you have to make right with God, please do it as we stand and we sing.